Hello.
Erica, how are you?
Good.
Good. Thanks for inviting me on. I don't get invited to a lot of these interviews. I'm normally the one asking the questions, so it's
I
nice to be on the
know.
other side.
I know. I said, you know what? Rather than waiting for John to invite me, I'm going to invite him, damn it. I
I
have that
appreciate it.
ability now. Okay, I'm just trying to like organize my monitor so I've got my questions on one side and I can watch you and me on the other window. So how you been, John?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing all right. I'm having a bit of a spring cleaning. I feel like with my office around me, my thoughts and my ideas and my planning. I feel like when the snow melts and the sun comes out for longer, I don't know. I feel like my brain just started sparking and saying, okay, now it's time to really reevaluate how the year has gone. It's only been, 3 months. We're going on month number 4. What do we need to cut? What do we need to keep? Your desk is a mess. Maybe we should clean that. You've been living in this hibernation mode where everything's been compacted in and you've been keeping warm, but now it's time to, you know, make some changes, make some waves.
Yeah, I bought a bunch more art supplies, and so now I'm having to figure out where to put everything. So I understand what you're saying, but
Yeah, it's one of those things where it has to happen. It's growing pains. You do this every year. I feel like we as humans do this every year where we hate it, we grumble about it. Oh, I don't want change, but change is good. It's healthy.
yeah.
It's a part of growing. But
Speaking of that, I saw your post yesterday about the changes you're making for Top and Fiction,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I actually wanted to offer you some encouragement with that because
Okay.
I know it feels like you're losing something,
Right.
but I think that it gives you an opportunity to really refocus on the things that matter and the things that are going to make your newsletter stand out.
Right.
And so you don't have to be so doing everything all at once. You can just say,
Right.
these are the two things or one thing or however many you settle on and
Right.
really nail those items. So
Yeah,
I
and
think
I
it'll
I
actually end up being good for you.
yeah, I wanted to value quality over quantity this year. And I felt like last year, Top in Fiction, I was really going hard on the quantity because I wanted to build a library, build a sort of a reputation for a library. But I feel like now that we've reached that now I want to be known as a place of quality where you're going to come to Top in Fiction and you're going to actually find the top in fiction and the best. And in order to do that, I do need to scale back, and need to make it where the recognition and the highlighting that we're doing and the spotlighting that we're doing means more because it really isn't just handed out like candy. And that's not to say that what we've done in the past there was anything wrong with what how it was done. It's just this is a new phase. We're growing, we're expanding, we're reaching more readers, and so now it's time to really show what we've got, show what we're worth, show that, we're really damn good fiction writers here, and Top in Fiction is the place to go to find that.
I'll tell
But
you,
thank
you are
you.
not
Thank you.
lying. You're not lying when you say that you were trying to build up a library. Every time I log on to Substack, you're live with somebody new. And I'm like, come on, Erica, share some eyeballs for the rest of us. You don't have to take over the entire media tab and just, it's all Erica videos all the time.
Well, geez, John, I thought you liked seeing my face. Okay, I hear what you're saying. And you know what, John? I don't get enough John. I don't get
I
enough
know
John
nobody does.
footage.
But
Where is more John interviews? I mean, they're so stoic and so serious. I feel like I'm watching like a C-SPAN type of situation, and I can envision you sitting, and there's a little coffee table between you and the guest, and you're sipping coffee and you're having a real
I
moment.
really do try to, because when I interview people, what I look for is the people I interview are the ones that I've been following and or I'm subscribed to, and I've identified something in them that I'm like, you know, they do this one thing really well.
Mhm.
And so when I have them on, I try to talk about that one thing
Right.
and figure out what it is that makes it so good or what it is that makes how they're doing that work so well. And so I
Yeah.
do try to ask, thoughtful questions and get people to come out, and I try to let them do all the talking. So,
Right.
uh,
And what's it's so funny you should say that because one of the things for my own taking top and fiction out and just dealing with my Substack personally. One of the things I've noticed is I do too much in too many different places. And for you to say I try to find that one thing that they do well, I want to find that one thing that I do well and say that this is what I want to do. And I know that you might say, well, I mean, you've been doing your 100 word stories for almost 1,000 days consecutively. That would be the one thing Erica does well. But I don't want to be defined by that, and so I'm trying to redefine who I want people to um, pre-assume that I am when they come to my Substack. And so I'm trying that this year. Like I changed my Substack to the happy place, and I wanted to, and it's not really a happy place. It's actually a place of nightmares and a place of scary stories, and that's what I'm leaning into. And so I want to be known as someone who writes scary fiction, and whether that's a novel or a short story or a 100 word story, it can run the gamut, but the idea is that I write horror, not that I'm, oh, she's the 100 word story girl. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So I'm trying to do that because I want people to see me and say, okay, I get what she's doing.
I really do understand it because I recently, like within the past 6 months, I've narrowed down what I focus on with my Substack to four things. And I've been doing it like that where I'm just like, okay, if I write a post, it's going to go in one of these four areas. But after having done it for these several months, now I'm thinking, you know, I'm thinking about just the only thing I'm going to publish here are short stories that actually honestly feel like the Twilight Zone because that's what I like and that's the kind of
And
stories I want to write.
that's why we're here, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, we haven't hit to the topic yet, but you just kind of segued us into it as to why you're here. Because honestly, I could have brought you on and we could have been talking and discussing anything because I have so many thoughts and ideas of what I would love to talk to you about every time I see you do one of your own interviews or I, read what you're putting out. But the real reason why I have you on is because the Substack Zone, which happened November of last year, blew up, and I know that I get a lot of thanks from Jay Curtis and from Shane for helping to bring that to an even larger audience, and they went on to publish a collection of those works. But I could not help but notice who was not in the collection of the Midnight Vault, and I said I need to highlight the man, the myth, the legend that is John Ward. I want to ask him these questions that I asked everyone else, but I want to ask him face to face. I don't want him to just answer them in an email like I've had other people doing and send me their answers. I wanted to just have like a discussion with you because I got the impression that you have a love of the Twilight Zone, similar to my love of the Twilight Zone. So I just wanted to have you on. I did let you see what the 6 questions were ahead of time because you were like, okay, I'll come on, but I want to know what you're going to ask me. And so I said, all right, John, I'll tell you the questions. Because I was initially not going to show you the questions. It was going to be um, sort of like I'm going to ask you and you're not going to know ahead of time, but you know what they are. So you're not going to get caught off guard.
And
Um,
it's a good thing because some of these questions actually you have to prepare for.
You think so? Okay. Well, that makes me feel good because I was hoping that I asked the kind of questions that people would care to know the answer to, but that the person answering them would feel like they had to put some thought into it. Like it wasn't just
Well,
some whatever came into your head. So,
specifically, your last question is one where you
right.
wouldn't want to ad lib that.
Right.
But the
You
rest of them
wouldn't.
I could go off the top of my head, but
Right, right.
that one
I
you have
figured
to.
when we got to that one, it would be rather interesting, and I want to give everyone this is also your like the preamble, if you will,
Okay.
to what is being released on April 14th. I've been teasing that's coming, and you guys are getting a first look on what these questions are that I asked everyone who participated in the Substack Zone, not just John. So think about that in the back of your minds as you're getting his answers, that you will be getting the answers from a lot more people, just not in this amazing format, which is live. So thank you for being almost the guinea pig, for being the preamble, for being the beginning to this um, next phase that thankfully, everyone who participated in the Substack Zone was willing to take this ride with me and answer these questions, so I appreciate it. But let's start with the first one. Um, so setting aside your story for a moment, we will get back to it because I do want you to talk about which story you wrote for the Substack Zone event that took place. But what is your favorite Twilight Zone episode and why?
Okay. Before I answer that, I did want to say I want to tell you thank you because I'd seen you posting on notes. This is, I don't know, like 9 months ago. You were talking about how much you're enjoying reading Twilight Zone Companion, I believe it was
Yeah.
called.
Yep.
And I have like, I've got all the
Yeah.
script
I'm
books up
seeing
there,
them. Yep.
but I never read the companion, so I went and got that, and that's a great book. I love the
I mean,
history it
you're
gives you about.
reading it cover to cover, right? It's one of those
Yeah,
where you almost feel like it's a reference book where where you could flip to it when you read an episode, but the way it's written, I mean, I was reading it cover to cover.
yeah, and I mean, like the tragic story of Charles Beaumont and how he died so young and all that. It
Yeah.
was just really good insight into and the influence that Buck Houghton had on all the episodes. It
And
was good
if you
stuff.
read that, then you know where the happy place came from because it came from me reading that where it was the first story that Rod Sterling wrote that he wanted to be the first episode and they said it was too dark. And
Yeah,
so he had to pivot to what we know as the pilot episode. But when I read the premise of the happy place, I was like, oh, it sounded similar to a short story I had written many moons ago, which I will release later this year. But it spoke to me immediately, and I said, "I'm gonna change my Substack to the happy place for that reason."
and the other thing I want to bring up is the reason I wasn't included in the anthology collection. Um, I wanted to be. Um, it's just that when I was writing this story, I I really experienced this. I felt like a breakthrough as a writer because I'd never tried to really look into Twilight Zone as far as okay, if I was going to write a Twilight Zone episode, what would I do and how or why? Why did they do this stuff? And so as I was writing this, I went through this and it just opened up so much understanding to me.
Right.
And this story felt really special. And so I was like, I do want to participate in that because everybody, I'm literally the only stand up. But I wanted to be participate with those guys. But at the same time, I realized, I'm going to take this story and I'm going to build it out into a novel. And when I do that, I want the freedom to be able to put it in like Kindle Unlimited or wherever.
Right.
And if
Right.
I was part of a collection, then I wouldn't be able to do that. And that's the only
Mhm.
reason that I didn't participate.
And
But
I will tell you that I did go to Jay and I said, okay, the elephant is in the room, and I've got to ask the question because I don't know if it was a good reason or a bad reason, but I want to know why isn't John in the collection? And so he told me exactly what you said, and I will tell you what in my mind the reason why I thought you weren't in the collection, and it's almost as good a reason as why you're not in the collection, and I can't wait to read this novel. But in my mind, I said to myself, because you seem like the kind of person who would say, I want this story, my story, the Twilight Zone story, to be available to everyone and free to everyone to read until I decide otherwise. Because I know that everyone who's in the collection now, I believe everyone put their story behind a paywall now. Um, if I'm not mistaken. I think I tried to go through everyone's, but I in my mind I'm thinking maybe John just wanted his story to stand out and just be still readily available and readable to everyone who comes across it and wants to read it. And so I appreciate that your story is still out there and that people can still go and read your contribution to the Substack Zone if they want. But I'm also looking forward to
well,
the novel that comes from it, and I might have to ask you a seventh question because I want to know how you're going to expand your
that's
story
fine.
beyond that of the short story. But
I will say that your interpretation of my motivations makes me sound like a much nicer, more thoughtful
I know
person. So we'll go with that.
I
Let's just
had a
say that that's
feeling
what
you
it
were going to
was.
say that. Like I would
So
never think such a do such a grandiose make such a grandiose gesture, but that's what I thought.
But as for your question, um, this is the type of question that changes as you get older.
Right.
When I was young, I started watching Twilight Zone. I was homesick one night, and my mom, I was laying on the couch with my mom, and it came on, and she's like, "Oh, you're going to like this." And so that was my introduction to the Twilight Zone. And ever since then, we always watched it every time we had a chance. And then as an adult, I just binge watch it. Used to be only you could watch it on New Year's when they did the
Right, right.
marathons,
New
but
Year's Eve, yeah.
now with streaming, you can pull it up anytime you want.
Right.
Um, but as a child, my answers was the same as everyone. You know, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Time
Right.
Enough at Last, Stop at
Right.
Willoughby.
And
Uh,
you could argue that that's the ones because when they do stuff like the marathon or anytime you watch the Twilight Zone episode, it was typically the popular 20, right? That they would replay. So you had to really be a fan, I think, to watch everything outside of that, of outside of the ones that you're familiar with because you at our age when I was younger, you could easily probably have gotten bored with some of the ones that now watching as an adult I'm captivated by. I don't
yeah,
know if a game of pool would have captivated me as a child watching two grown men playing a game of pool as the 20,000 feet with a monster outside of the plane. You know what I mean? Like there's a difference
yeah.
in your mindset on what you're willing to sit through today that you weren't. And now I will say the ones that I loved as a child, I find corny. And I find that they don't have that same sense of wonder and imagination as something as simple as a game of pool where it's just two men and having a conversation and the dialogue back and forth.
Erica, you're stealing my thunder
Sorry.
because um, my very favorite episode is a game of pool. But
Okay.
I love all of the Jack Klugman episodes. You have
Right.
and Praise the Pip, um,
Right. Which
A
is another
Passage for
one where you
Trumpet.
have to be willing to really pay attention to that because that's I mean now you're talking about an episode where it's almost just one man and
Yeah,
it's just his inner monologues and his outer monologues and that's
yeah.
it.
And then Passage for Trumpet and Death Ship. Those are the four Jack Klugman episodes. And the thing that all of those have in common is, with the exception of Death Ship, but the other three, Klugman plays this guy who's been beaten down by life and just, you know, hard luck and hard knocks. And he's this lovable loser kind of guy to varying degrees in each, depending on the character. But then at the end of the episode, he finally gets the thing that he's wanting in some way. And as a young man and as a younger man, I had just started a family, and I was at that crossroads where it's like, okay, I can really focus and dive in and try to make my career if I'm willing to not be around for my kids as much. And Game of Pool, which examines that very idea of what are you willing to pay for success?
Hmm.
And that's why that episode speaks to me so much and why I came to enjoy it so much. And but all of the Klugman episodes I love. But those are my favorite one is Game of Pool.
Now, did that inspire the story you ended up writing? Because the next question is what episode, if any, of the Twilight Zone inspired you to write the story you went on to write? You could, tell us a bit about your story as well.
The story that inspired me to write it is because, okay, I wasn't initially invited to participate in the thing because I think I'm mostly well known. I'm kind of like you know, people don't really associate me with writing fiction. It's
Hmm.
mostly the interviews I've done. But when I saw that they were doing Twilight Zone, I reached out and contacted Jay Curtis and Sean and um, asked him, "Hey, can I participate? I know that I'm not in the group, but I would love to participate. I love Twilight Zone, and I think I could do this." And so they brought me in, and then whenever I got the nod to go ahead, I started to think, okay, well, what kind of Twilight Zone story do I want to tell? And immediately I thought of the Jack Klugman episodes. Okay, I want to have a lovable loser
Mhm.
who is, struggling to make it in life and wants something, but he never feels like he can get it. And then throughout the course of that story, he actually gets it. But then, examining what does that cost, and is he willing to pay the price for that thing, and stuff like that. And so that was the whole setup. But it was inspired by Passage for Trumpet. If you watch, I know you've watched that, but he's a trumpet player who's very gifted, but
Right.
he's a drunk. He
Right.
can't he can't overcome his alcoholism. And throughout the course of that episode, he undergoes some epiphanies and realizes some things about himself, turns his life around, gets sober, and at the end, he finds happiness. Try not to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it because it really is worth watching,
Mhm.
and it holds up even 50 years after it came out.
And one thing I'm thinking about now is, not every Twilight Zone um doesn't have a happy ending. Some of them do. They might not be happy as we define it. Happiness comes in different ways, and that's what I think I love about every Twilight Zone episode. That some of them end well, and some of them end well, but death still happens in those. And it's all in how you interpret what happiness is for each character that each episode is based off of. What is
I
their
think the thing that
happiness?
really defines Twilight Zone is that each episode tends to recontextualize things by the end of the episode. Um, you go in and you think you understand what's going on, and then by the end of the episode, you're like, "Oh, well, now I understand what was really happening."
Right,
And or even if it's not really a big reveal, like you're learning something new, you'll learn to see the facts in a different way and understand it from that character's point of view.
right. I
And
mean, some key examples that people will have seen, and so and it's always like, oh, you can't believe the ending is like To Serve Man or Eye of the Beholder, where you think you know what's going on until the end when you're like, oh, okay, that's not what they were trying to say. I mean, the message is clear in Eye of the Beholder that that's where beauty lies, and you think that she's trying to be a supermodel, but it turns out she's a supermodel who stands out and is trying to look like them, which is more alien-like, and it spoiler to anyone who you'd have to be under a rock if you haven't seen Eye of the Beholder, but it's like that's the kind of thing that some of them do, but not all of them. Some of them really are very dialogue heavy, and
yeah,
it is about just um, the inner dialogue and the outer dialogue that the characters have with each other, and with the world around them and how they respond to it. Um, and then some of them are just really sarcastic.
yeah.
They just have that sense of sarcasm, where it's just like, well, that's irony for you. Um,
Well,
okay,
Sterling really believed in social commentary, and he
right,
wanted to make, he felt like writers had an obligation to comment on society.
right,
And that's what he did in a lot of his episodes.
yeah, and he commented, but he also left you to decide
Yeah.
what was right and what was wrong. And
And the thing is, the thing that Sterling did so well that modern writers have completely forgotten how to do, it seems like, is his comment wasn't someone standing there preaching to you about, well, you should feel this way or you should think this. The entire episode was his comment. It was the entire story that you're experiencing was the point that he was trying to make and trying to get you to consider. And there are a few times where he does take a hard stance and says, okay, this is how things should be, because he comes out against racism and things like that. And in his closing monologue, many times he'll have some kind of statement where it's
mhm,
very direct. But a lot of times it's like, like you look at Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. That ends with him making comment about, it's about the Cold War fear and everything.
mhm,
But it's kind of open ended where it's like, is this really the world we want to live in? And it, the whole episode is asking that question of, is this what we really want to be like?
Right.
And
Okay, so the my third question, which we can get right on to, is what story elements of the Twilight Zone did you intentionally include or exclude? Because we know there's a lot of Twilight Zone where the beats are the same, or a lot of them you can easily follow the premise and the highs and the lows. So, is there any elements that you really love that you wanted to make sure? I know you mentioned the solitary guy who's down on his luck and then he
yeah,
gets what he wants.
yeah. Just like in Passage for Trumpet, I wrote a story about a guy who's just like this lovable loser. My story is about a guy who works an IT desk overnight, and he's socially awkward. He sees people around him making friendships and falling in love and stuff, but he doesn't know how to navigate that. And through a series of events in the story, he's placed in the positions where he's given the opportunity to learn. And thankfully, the young lady in the story, my story is like a love story. Um, she helps him navigate that maze on his as they go through it together. But it's very much the whole story about the lovable loser and what it costs to find love.
Okay, so now tell us, well, you just told us about your story, um, and what makes it Twilight Zone-esque. So you have your main character. Are there any other, like, who is he is there one person he's interacting with? Is it the world? Is it just himself and the inner monologue? Like, what's his motivation for change?
Okay. The reason my Twilight Zone story would feel like or my story would feel like a Twilight Zone episode is I place the focus on the character, what they want, and the emotional journey that he goes on as he achieves those goals. Um, there are two main characters, Scott and Cassandra, and then there's a few people who are like bit players. They just appear for specific scenes and then they're gone. But everything that's in there is all feeding back into that idea of this guy learning how to navigate society and what he's willing to do or not willing to do to achieve his goal of, you know, finding a relationship with this young lady that he's met.
Now, one thing I love about the Twilight Zone, and I love about shows that took place in the 60s through about the 80s, is when you could spot the star. And I love that when you get to see, all of these stars are so young and this is where they started. It was almost like you run the gamut of you're in a soap opera today or back then you did a Murder She Wrote episode, you were in a Columbo, you were in all these different episodes, and Twilight Zone was one of them, littered with so many stars starting out, or they were famous back then as well. But if you could pick anyone, living or dead, that's a star to play those two character roles or any other characters in your story, who would you pick? This is the one that I wanted to know selfishly. I was like, I don't know if anyone else would be interested to know this, but I would because I love spotting the stars.
Well, Twilight Zone's in such a great position when they launched because you have the big movie studios that had built up all these studios and sound stages and everything. And at the same time, TV is just coming on, which is causing people not to see as many movies as they used to. And so you have all these big name stars that are out of work
Right? They needed something
and
new.
empty sound stages that aren't being used. And that's when Twilight Zone shut up. And they gave, you know, they have this small budget, I would imagine, compared to movies,
Hmm.
but these actors need jobs. And so they're willing to take you know, work on an episode. You have Burgess Meredith in several episodes. I mean, he's a fantastic actor.
Hmm.
Um, but it shouldn't surprise you. The person I would cast as Scott would be Jack Klugman. I don't
Right.
know anyone who Klugman isn't classically handsome. He's not a heartthrob or anything, but he can really emote pathos and make you feel like he's suffering.
Mhm.
And I think he does it better than anyone else in the Twilight Zone. Um, for Cassandra, I I actually hadn't thought of that because I was focused. I thought, well, obviously I would pick Jack Klugman. For Cassandra,
I mean, is she
I don't know.
supposed to be the one who's so classically beautiful that to be associated with a man like him would just be
I don't
wouldn't fit,
really
but it
go
fits.
into a lot of detail about her looks.
Right.
He She works in a coffee shop. The name of my story is The Last Cup.
Yeah.
Um, and so she works in a coffee shop. He sees her every morning as he's getting off work, and he stops by and gets coffee and Danish on his way home. And he's attracted to her, but he never has the courage to
Hmm.
actually start a conversation. This story, the way their relationship comes about is she sparks up the conversation. She's the one who initiates their um, talking to him and everything. And she does it in a way that surprises him that he isn't expecting. And I feel like it's a very sweet romance, but um, it's not about her being gorgeous or beautiful. It's about he sees her every day and comes to admire her and
Hmm.
wants to get to know her better.
Okay. So
But
now the sixth question, which you said is one you're glad you knew ahead of time because you needed time to prepare. So I assume you've prepared
your sixth question
somewhat.
was if Rod Serling was going to, how would I introduce it if Rod Serling was going to say the words?
Right.
And I actually did include this in my story.
Okay, good.
And um, so it's still up there. I have a note at the end explaining that I'm not going to charge people for this story. This is like fan fiction, a love letter to the Twilight Zone.
Yep.
Um, and so, because of that disclaimer, I feel like, okay, I can actually include this. Um, so, this is, I don't know, maybe 500 words into my story. It's not the very beginning,
Mm.
but
Those are
um,
always good. I like the ones where they open and you're as a Twilight Zone fan, you're like, wait, isn't Rod supposed to say something? And it's not until it gets to that moment and then he'll come out of the doorway or come around the corner or the camera will do the pan and there he is and he's ready to say what he's got to say.
yeah. In this, the scene that's leading up to this, Scott's working overnight. It's 3 in the morning. He's by himself in this one room. And um, he has a screensaver on his computer monitor where it's just like the number bouncing around the screen and it's the time of night. And the passage begins, the world froze. The bouncing numbers of the screensaver halted their journey across Scott's monitor, trapped in digital amber at 3:49 a.m. From the shadows emerged a gaunt man in an immaculate suit, his movements liquid in the static moment. The cherry of his cigarette glowed as he drew a long breath, the only warmth in the suspended air. His voice cut through the stillness. Picture, if you will, a man who spends his nights alone with machines, more comfortable with code than conversation. Scott Robinson, an IT professional who's about to discover that some debugging requires more than technical expertise. His morning routine at the Daily Grind coffee shop is the one constant in his carefully ordered world until anonymous text messages begin to arrive, each one warning of an impending disaster, each one demanding a choice. What begins as a simple crush on a barista who knows his order by heart will lead Scott to question the very nature of heroism, sacrifice, and love itself. A tale served hot and fresh at the Daily Grind, where today's special is tomorrow's destiny, and the price of saving lives might be higher than anyone is prepared to pay. Submitted for your consideration, a story of love and timing, where a man's last cup of coffee might just be his first in the Twilight Zone. And it says, without comment, the man turned away, his footsteps echoing in perfect isolation across the room. The shadows welcomed him back like an old friend. As he vanished, life stuttered forward. The screensaver's numbers resumed their endless dance, and the clock ticked over to 3:50 a.m. And then the story continues from there.
You heard it here, guys. I got John to read some fiction to us.
That is my first time ever doing a public reading.
Wow,
So
that was, I mean,
you made history tonight.
I did. I did. Mark it. Mark your calendars. So I will only ask you to read the end if you feel like it doesn't have too many spoilers, or I could just direct people with a link to read the story and they can read the end. But just so you know, John did do the classic Twilight Zone where there is an ending and the man in the shadows comes out, I would imagine, to give us some final words.
Yeah, I don't want to read that because it does reveal
Right.
um, details of the story.
Yep.
Um, so if you could link to it, then
Yeah,
that'd be
I
great.
totally would. But that was, I mean, I could hear Rod Serling, not just hear him, but I imagine you saying like when he comes out of the shadows and he's smoking his cigarette and he goes back,
Yeah.
recedes back and the shadows welcome him. That's great.
The great thing about Rod Serling is he has several phrases he uses over and over again,
Right. So you can
submitted for your
hear his, right,
consideration. And, you know, so if you, anybody who includes those, it automatically sounds like Rod Serling because he defined those narrative
right,
monologues so well.
right.
And it's one of the things I love so much about the Twilight Zone.
And not to take away from the Twilight Zone, but one thing I do want to mention is he almost started a movement or a revolution, if you will, because one of the other shows that I love watching aside from the Twilight Zone all the time are Alfred Hitchcock Presents and the
Yeah.
Alfred Hitchcock Hour, where he does a very similar thing, just with a little bit more sarcasm and tongue in cheekness when he does his openings and his closings, where they're kind of ridiculous, and I think he does that intentionally, just because people don't see him as very humorous, but he's a very humorous guy.
Yeah,
So
he
they
really leaned into humor with his.
he
And
does.
sometimes actual slapstick type
Right,
things were,
right, where
you know,
it's just like Alfred Hitchcock, why is he doing comedy when he's introducing an but the difference would be, in many of the Alfred Hitchcock presents, he didn't write those. He's just kind of the face and the name, whereas with the Rod Serling Twilight Zone, a good chunk of them he wrote,
yeah.
especially in the first season, um, where he kind of had the reins to the show. But it just you hearing you do that, I'm like imagining these men who would come out and do their thing. Did you ever see any of the newer Twilight Zones, the new
Yeah.
iterations?
Mhm.
Okay. I unfortunately have not, and I keep wanting to, but part of me is like, I don't know if am I going to be too judgmental and critical, because I know a lot of them are doing either a remake or a continuation or a follow-up of the ones that I know. And so I'm just like, I don't want to hate the Jordan Peele, is it Jordan Peele version of Twilight Zone. I don't want to take that in my head and go and watch it and then I won't appreciate it because I'm too busy saying, well, it's not as good as the original. I'll just go back to what I know.
I'll tell you, the one in the '80s that they did, they did a relaunch in of the Twilight
Right.
Zone in the '80s.
Right.
George R.R. Martin was like the main showrunner for that.
Okay.
They had episodes that were written by Stephen King, by John Romero. They have a ton of very high-profile writers creating original stories.
Hmm.
And there's one episode, can't remember if it's Night Walker or Shadow Walker. It's something like that. And I was like, I don't know, 11 years old when I saw that. And I just thought it was the most amazing story. And even now, I still look back with that fondness. And you
Right.
have, there's several stories that George R. R. Martin wrote for the series. That's probably the closest you get to the
What the
Rod
original
Serling
was.
feeling. The Jordan Peele one, I was actually disappointed with because they didn't create original episodes. They just updated the classics.
Hmm.
So instead of Nightmare at 20,000 feet, you have Nightmare at 40,000 feet.
Right.
And it's just a retelling. Now they do add some twists in it, and they try to make it their own, but they're not making new material. It's just recycling original scripts.
Yeah, I think one of the
Um,
things I almost the one thing that I think bothers me is, or that I don't know if it would bother me, is you become a slave to technology's advancements. And so when you look at a Twilight Zone from the original, they only had what they had. They didn't have CGI, they didn't have the benefits of that, right? And so I always worry when people try to remake or redo things that it is going to be obvious that you're using these tools because you have them, not because you need to. I don't think Twilight Zone Rod Serling would have necessarily used all the bells and whistles that we have today, because a lot of his didn't need it. Like, the makeup to me was amazing. The artistry was amazing. It was the acting that mattered. But,
yeah,
are they falling back on, the CGI of it all, and is that going to take away from the story? It's in many ways it's why some of the newer Star Trek I can't get behind, just because it's like I like the corniness of the look of it in the 80s, and you're trying to tell me this show is a prequel to my 80s show, but it looks like this Starfleet just came off the boat yesterday. Like, you're not giving me the feel and the nostalgia, the placid colors. Just because you make it black and white doesn't mean that it is, because you can tell that you're leaning too heavily in the new technology, and I long for the nostalgia of it's just two people walking into a room talking, and
yeah,
it the look on their face and the expression and all the sweat, the real sweat, like they're really sweating because the lights were so hot on them, and that was real. um
yeah.
and so I will, I think, at some point have to just grow up, if you will, just watch the
Well,
remakes.
I will say that, you know, the Jordan Peele episode or series, um, for all its shortcomings, and I mean, I'm not criticizing because it is, there are some interesting things that happen in it. It's just I was so disappointed because I wanted new episodes.
Right.
And but at the end of the series, the final episode, they do a thing to honor Rod Serling. And I found that to be very moving. It was almost worth watching the entire season just to get to that episode.
Right.
Um, but it does feel like a missed opportunity because, there are writers out there working today who could deliver that Twilight Zone feel.
Easily,
And
easily. And I will say I am working on a collection of retwisting or twisting some of my Twilight Zone episodes that I like, but that a lot of people don't know. I didn't want to touch any of the favorites, because sometimes some of them I can't even imagine what I would redo. Like, like there's nothing left. I mean, 20,000 versus 40,000 feet. Okay, sure. But one of them actually is a game of pool. I am looking to do a twist on that. I won't say what the twist is, but I'm revisiting these now. I'm reading the books, I'm learning the backstories of it, and it's just sparking so many ideas where, I want to pay homage to the Twilight Zone, and so I'm writing my collection called Return to Twilight. And the idea is to take, 15 stories and really twist them up in my version of what horror or what the happy place is. And so just the Twilight Zone, I love that it's so um, evergreen, that generations from now, I think people will still be looking at the Twilight Zone and still finding the horror and finding the message. And in some of them, unfortunately, trying to learn the lesson. So some of those lessons are still not learned today, that they were trying to learn so
but
many
that's
years
the thing
ago.
that makes Twilight Zone so eternal is because every episode is focused on some theme or some question, some idea that it wants the viewer, hey, look at this thing. Think about this issue. How do you feel about it?
Mm,
Here's one possible way that this could go. And you leave the episode and you have something to talk about with your family or the people who watched it with you
mm.
because they all are very thoughtful.
Well,
And you better not mess up game of pool or I'll
well,
do
I
a
will tell
reaction
you, one
video.
of the first things I said is I don't want it. Honestly, the first thing I thought of, which I really was struggling, was I said, what games happen that are televised that are between two people that you would practice alone and no one's what like that was where I came at it from. I said, okay, this game of pool, they're just at a pub, a local pub in a small town, and people obviously came there. I mean, it's not like today where he's like on ESPN and he's like the world champion and now he wants to be the world champion, but he can't be because the guy is dead. But it's that level, bringing it to the 21st century of what would that look like. It would look like it would go beyond the walls of a small pub in a small town. You know, I was like, chess is too boring. I was thinking like tennis, maybe. I don't know. I was like, I want a different sport that's
You should
just
do
out there.
you should do a game of influencers, and it's about a TikTok star
Oh God, I
who
hate
is
TikTok.
trying to live up to some person who died, who had a massive fan base.
Well, I
So
came up with a sport that's not popular or wild or widely known. I won't even say it here because you're gonna say that's a sport. And so because my wife gave me the idea, so I'm gonna go with that and see how it goes. But it's less about what they're playing and more about the reason why it's even happening. So I and
yeah,
that's the point
well,
I'm
that's
trying
what
to make,
the whole
that it's not
episode's about.
really about, a game of pool that just happens to be the catalyst here, but
That's the metaphor.
so
Yeah.
you can put anything in its place and it would still hold the same sentiment, but there needs to be obviously a twist. And I won't say what the twist is at the end of a game of pool because it's one that I don't think many people have seen, so I won't spoil it. I don't think it's considered one of the like top 20 or top 10 in uh, Twilight Zone lore,
And
so I
for me,
won't
it's number
say.
one. I mean, it's the
I know,
best.
but for a lot of people, it isn't. So, so I won't
Well, a
say
lot of
how it
people are
ends.
wrong, and
Yes.
they need to go watch the episode and change their minds.
I agree. I mean, I feel like if you, I don't know if you have Pluto TV, but I have Pluto TV all the time, and they have a channel that's just the Twilight Zone. So I have it on my TV, and it's just playing 24/7, the episodes,
I
all of
own
the
the whole
episodes.
series, so I
Well,
just
I do too,
pull
but
up.
it's easy, so I don't have to put a disc in or
Yeah.
anything. I'm just like, I just put it on the TV, and I just lean over, look at my TV, see what episode it is, and if I
Yeah.
want to watch it, I'll go sit on the couch. But thank you, John, for coming on. This was amazing. Thank you for all that you're doing for the fiction community. I see it, everyone else sees it. And oh, wait, my seventh question. You thought I forgot?
Okay.
How are you taking The Last Cup and making that into a full-fledged novel?
Okay. I'm doing a little bit of a cheat here, um,
Okay.
in that because I did think about okay, and I actually even started rewriting this as a full length novel. But the thing that makes this work as a short story would not work as a novel, or at least I'm not a good enough writer to make it work as a novel. Um, just being honest here. And so what I did was I've come up with a story about an antique dealer. Um, it's an old woman. She has a small antique store in West Virginia, where I grew up, and she has this mild magical ability where if she touches an object, she's able to see significant moments from its past.
Hmm.
And so these people come into the shop, they're looking around, and a lot, all the antiques basically are the same type of things you would see in any antique store, and with a heavy focus on West Virginia, the area where she lives. Um, but in the midst of all this, there's this broken coffee cup,
Hmm.
and it's a ceramic cup, it's a modern cup, and it's just so out of place, and it's almost given a place of honor. And so these people come in and they ask, "What's the deal with this cup? What's going on here? It doesn't feel right." And that leads into her telling Scott and Cassandra's story to these people, um, which it's very much like a that part is like a Twilight Zone
Hmm.
episode where she would be the narrator relating the
Right.
events of this cup. But that that's not the whole novel. The story is very much about this antique woman or antique dealer and her story.
Right.
but there are moments where she will tell people about some artifact or some antique and the story behind it.
I love how you say, "Oh, she has some small minor bit of magic." I mean,
Well, I don't want to make it seem like she's this full-on, fantasy novel type thing.
right, right.
It's it's very low key presented, matter of factly.
Hmm.
Um, so
It's more like a speculative fiction than a sci-fi or fantasy situation.
yeah,
I imagine where it's just an element to the story, but it's not the whole story.
it's
We're not gonna find her to be some sort of witch making incantations in the back.
yeah, it's like if you look at the Twilight Zone episode, Something in the Dark, this woman can see death.
Right.
Um, but why? Is that magic? I don't know.
Mm.
It's just
And
part of the
I'm
world
also
where this
thinking
episode
of
takes place.
and I can't think the title escapes me right now, but the one where the guy sells little trinkets and things, but he sells the thing that you need and you don't realize you need it until
Are you talking
like
about
you
One for the Angels
no
or
the other one where the I can only remember the twist at the end
oh,
where he gives the
Printer's
guy
Devil?
shoes.
Printer's Devil. Is that it? Where
Um
that's
no,
Burgess
he where
Meredith?
he's selling it from his suitcase and he goes into a bar
Oh,
and he
the
gives the
mob.
guy
The guys in the
yeah.
mob. Yeah, okay.
Right, and
Yeah,
he gives him I think he gives him like a pair of shoes or he like the guy sees that he gives people things that he needs and he gives him the scissors and he's able to cut his tie so he doesn't like get strangled.
yeah,
Like I'm thinking of that, like that character came into my head immediately. But
yeah,
then at the end he has to give the guy something he needs, but it's more like something he needs, not the guy to
yeah,
save his life.
yeah.
But anyway, I was just thinking
But
about that.
that's a great example though, because it is exactly what you said, where this is just the world. This is how it works here.
Right.
But
Right.
if you would stop to think about it, yeah, it's magic or something's going on
Yeah, like how
like
does he
that.
know? But that's not really you're asking the wrong question. If the question you're asking is how does she see the thing, you're missing the point, which is what she sees, not
Yeah,
how she sees it or why.
yeah.
But yeah, okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. No pressure, but hope we get it soon.
I'm hoping maybe around June if
Now,
I'm able to.
are you gonna do the Substack thing and release it as a serial, or are you gonna make us wait and you're gonna release it all at once in book form? Like, what's your plan and process? Because this is something if you had someone on, you would be asking them, okay, you you specialize in serials, all that you've learned, John, from all the interviews and everything you've seen and everyone you've spoken to, what's John's path now with this book?
Okay. Um, I do plan on releasing it in Kindle Unlimited, which requires exclusivity.
Right.
Um, I had thought about serializing it on Substack, but I'll tell you, there's so many people who are doing serials on Substack.
Yep.
I'm actually leaning the other way, where whenever I release fiction, it's going to be a standalone short story, maybe 4,000 words at the most,
Right.
something you can read in maybe 40 minutes or less. And it's self-contained. So if you just come onto it, 1 week, then the next week's going to be something different. That way you don't have to worry about, well, I've got to go back and read 30 previous chapters.
Mm,
Um, and then I'm going to, I think that's how I use Substack is I post fiction here, short stories, and then I'm going to publish novels on Amazon, self-publishing,
mm,
because I like to have control and everything. Um, and because nobody's knocking on the door, handing me large amounts of money.
right.
But uh, so I think that's the approach I'm going to take.
Okay.
And that way, if people read the short stories, they like it, and they want something longer, there are books out there. And
Well, for us print lovers, I hope you will also create a paperback version as well.
yeah, I plan to. Um, I hear every author I know says that, you know, hardly anyone ever buys print, but
I love when people say that because I'm like, look, you should see my library. Are you kidding?
yeah,
I prefer
but
print.
you're probably picky about what print books you buy, aren't you?
I am,
Compared to the ebooks that you're willing to try.
well, I actually don't read ebooks.
Oh,
I
really?
will you know what, I now not only do I not read ebooks, but I just recently discovered my love of audiobooks, which I never
Oh, yeah.
thought that I would do. But I still cannot do I can read the news on my phone, I can scroll the news, I can scroll Substack, but ask me to read any book on my phone and I can't do it. I'd rather spend the 10, 15, $20 to buy the print on Amazon, get it next day, and I can read it in my hands. There's something about books that I can't get behind, but I'm getting older now and I feel like my reason for doing things is changing, and so I'm accepting the change. And not to change the subject too far, but I just recently realized my desire to have things physical is less important as the ease and laziness with which I can access it digitally.
Yeah.
And it's crazy for me to think, but I was going to play a video game and I realized that in order for me to play it, I had to come downstairs to my office, find the physical copy, take the cartridge out and put the new one in. And I said, if I had this digitally on the device, I had the device already with me. I would never have needed to come down the stairs to find the thing to go back upstairs, right? And so, will that mean that at some point I will say to myself, instead of having to look on my shelf for that one book that I want to read, I could just have it on my tablet and read it? I feel like that's a far leap. But I also consider all the music I have on my phone. I haven't owned a CD or purchased a CD in decades, right? Why is it that's a no-brainer, but you tell me I should buy a book as an ebook and I'm just like, no way. That's never going to happen. I'm buying print the rest of my life. I might
Yeah.
change. I feel the change happening. This whole video game situation really upset me. Like, I'm too old to be going down some stairs to find a video game. Why do I not have it on device? And I'm thinking, and that really just the switch flipped in my brain and I said, man, now I get it why people get digital. It's just you don't have to go. I always have my phone on me. If I wanted to read a book, I could easily pull it out and just have it on my phone instead of having to look for it on a shelf.
Yeah. My main reading time is at night, right before I go to sleep. So, reading
Right.
on a e-reader or on my phone,
Oh, that's not good
it's
for your
much
eyes,
more
John.
considerate. Yeah, but it's better for my wife because that way I don't have to have a,
Nightlight on.
big
Right.
overhead light on and
Right.
stuff. I know
Right.
they make like book lights and stuff, but then it's always a matter of juggling, and if you roll over, then you got to change everything.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
easier.
And looking on my shelf, I will say to you with honesty, I think what will end up happening is my collections are collections, which is I think is a difference between someone who buys a book just because they want to read it. Most of the books I have are because they look pretty on the shelf. So I'm the buyer who's going to buy the special edition, who's going to buy the collection where you have to put them together to make a pretty picture on the spine. Like that's my kind of purchasing. It's rare for me to buy a one-off book off the shelf just to read it. And I might be that person who says, I don't want to spend $30 just to buy a book. If I do, it's because I'm going to buy the whole set. It's because I'm going to buy the collection. It's because I want to see the pretty book on my shelf. Not everyone's like that, so each buyer is different. But for me, I buy collections, so every single one of the books on my shelf is a part of a collection, and I never touch it again. It's on my shelf, never taking it off my shelf again. It's there for aesthetics and nothing else, just to look pretty. Isn't that why the
Hopefully,
books
you
are on
read
your
it as
shelf?
well.
Well,
Pardon
yes,
me?
but then it goes on my shelf and then it stays there forever. But your books, aren't they for aesthetics? Like, don't you sit back and say, okay, these books look good here and these books look good together down here? I
I'll
know
tell
you
you.
do, John. You can admit it.
Now, we moved cross country like 12 years ago, and when we were getting ready to move, I think I had about 3,700 books, and it's like I can't afford to ship these things cross country, so
Right.
I pared it down to about 1,200. And now the only print books I buy are like ones that I'm using for reference.
I was gonna say
Um,
reference. Okay, yeah.
so
Yeah.
like I have all these how to think when you draw books right here.
Right.
These
So
are
so you mean
that's
the
on
books that you read for leisure or pleasure, those are the ones you do on ebook?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Now, there is an exception where if I read a book and I just like love it, and I'm also an audiobook as well. But if I love it, then I'll buy a physical copy. Because there is something different about actually reading with your eyes, looking at the words, going
Yeah.
page, page to page, um, where you assimilate it differently. Um, it's like you can enjoy the story through ebook or audio, but if you want to actually study a writer and see, well, how are they doing this thing? I think a physical copy is probably the better way to go.
Yeah. Well, I won't keep you. I feel like we could talk forever on a multitude of topics, and who knows, maybe one day you'll invite me on to have a
I know
chat,
I need to have you on. We
and
can do a
we could just go
deep
off on
dive
tangents
into, yeah.
into something about me I don't know. I'll let you decide what that topic is.
Okay.
You could surprise me, but thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who came and got to hear John and I gush over our love of the Twilight Zone. I appreciate it so much, and you have a wonderful rest of your day, John, and everyone in chat. And this will go up within the next couple of hours once I have the email that says it's ready to go. I will
All
share
right.
it with a link to the last cup so you can read John's story.
And thank you for having me on. I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
All right.
All right,
Bye.
guys. Bye.